Hello, Poetry Salon Cast listeners. This is Tresha Faye Haefner, founder of the Poetry Salon, and today I am with the poet Nikki Fragala Barnes. Nikki, you like to be called though DB, is that correct?
That is correct.
That
Yes.
is correct. Something that I learned when we did our reading the other day. So I'm going to call you DB. And let me give everyone your bio. And Nikki and I were already talking about the fact that she sent over this bio and I had to truncate it because, Nikki, you have done so much. So here are just a few of the little snippets of what you've done. Nikki DB Fragala Barnes, she, they, is an experimental poet and participatory installation artist using language as material. Barnes holds a PhD in text and technology, specializing in editing, publishing, and interdisciplinary curating, and an MFA of the Americas in poetry in the expanded field. They are a researcher and lecturer at the University of Central Florida, teaching poetry, writing, and fiction workshop. They also serve as the president of the Orlando Area Poets, a chapter of the FSPA NFSPS, and with the editorial collective of the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy, and on the board of directors at the Central Florida LGBTQ Museum of History, the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library and Museum, and the Menlo Museum of American Art. Recent scholarly work appears all over the place. I'm just going to stop there because I want to get to actually talking with you. But Nikki,
Mhm.
clearly you have been a very busy poet and educator and community builder and publisher. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. How do you even manage to have the time right now?
I really think that I'm one of those like I'll sleep when I'm dead people. And it turns out that my recent identification as ADHD helps explain a little bit of the energy I've always had a surplus amount of, which definitely came in handy as a parent of young children. And the motivation and the inspiration of all that I do is that it's really in the spirit of cultivation. I want to, support bringing these things to life in all different
Mhm.
areas. I never was just one thing. So, it's either do this or go stir crazy in my kitchen, right?
I completely identify with that. And I've mentioned this a few times, but various people in my life have been suggesting I might have undiagnosed ADD or ADHD. And I keep thinking, well, but no, I was a good student. I had good grades. No one ever said I was too distracted to finish my 5 paragraph essay.
Right.
Um, can't be a problem. And of course, I was a teacher in a classroom for a long time where your mind is going in so many different directions. Like, how would you notice? How would you even notice?
Right.
Uh, yeah, so maybe that's what it is. Maybe you're taking what is and just putting it to
Yeah.
focus good use.
Mhm.
Well, whatever it is, congratulations on all that you've accomplished.
Thanks.
And I think the PhD is pretty recent, isn't it?
Yes, moments ago in podcast time, just May was commencement, April was dissertation defense. So very exciting and a really cool season to be in now, just about, 6 or 8 weeks past that, where I'm starting to feel like this is the skin I'm in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Are you making people call you doctor?
So I have a little bit of a joke about it, which isn't really a joke, that it was the longest, hardest path to get rid of a gendered honorific. So I don't know that I recommend that to the general public, but I have invited folks, even baristas and family. And I live in the South, right? So people sort of default to saying, here you go, ma'am. Thank you, miss. And I say, it's doctor now.
That is
Because
really cool.
they, I think, mean that as a sign of respect, you know? And
And it is gender neutral. I'd actually
Yeah.
never before thought about what that means. Like,
Mhm.
you're right. Doctor is gender neutral. So we're all looking for like a gender neutral
That's
term
right.
we can use. Like, let's just all call each other doctor now,
Doctor does it. Yes. Yeah.
or rabbi,
Yeah.
minister.
Right.
That's some good stuff. I like to joke with people, and it really is a joke. I hope people don't take it to mean that I'm trying to be offensive, but it's just I greet so many things with humor. I kind of can't help it. But since I've moved to the South, I just say I live in the South now. My pronouns are all y'all,
Yes.
she all, they all, and all y'all. And that's
Yes.
what we call each
I
other now.
really I've always felt a little fish out of water in the South,
Hmm.
except for y'all is the best thing.
It is. It's kind of addictive,
Mhm.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Where are you from originally?
I was born in Miami, which is not the South, just for the record.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and my dad is from Brooklyn, and I did not realize until I was much older that even though my home was located in Florida, inside the walls was quite a Yankee upbringing and Yankee
Yeah.
household, you know? Yeah. So I grew up in both South and Central Florida.
Yeah, we're experiencing a lot of that too because we live now in the Triad, which is near the Research
Mm,
Triangle, which is like Raleigh and
yeah.
Durham and places like that. And
Mm-hmm.
it is very it's a city. There's people from all over the place.
Right.
And then you leave the city and that's when you're in North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
but then you go into the city and you're in Brooklyn, Miami, California, all the people who have come from other places and built an urban
Mm-hmm.
environment. So it's interesting. It's interesting getting to meet people from various cultures, and there's like cultures within cultures within
Mm-hmm.
cultures. So I'm actually looking at an email from you, and I love this quote that you have: "What we do matters. What we do together matters more."
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Yeah.
NFB original, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. It's from an essay I wrote. Yes.
I think that's really appropriate as an introduction for the poem that I'm going to ask you to read, which is actually two poems.
Mm-hmm.
And the way this works is I have selected a poem of yours that I want to discuss, and you have selected a poem.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to start with the one that I selected. But this poem is a terminal poem after Susan Lilly's poem Fall. So I'm going to ask you to read Susan Lilly's poem Fall first, and then you can explain what a terminal poem is,
Mm-hmm.
and then go ahead and read yours. So, listeners, relax. You're going to hear a couple minutes of poetry now.
Fall by Susan Lilly. For Orlando. As I left the post office the other day, a friendly tourist family in the car pulled over for advice on Asian restaurants within a 1 mile radius. I fanned myself with a useless LL Bean winter catalog as we discussed his options. He said, "You must miss the seasons." The seasons? We have seasons. Oh, yes, he smiled. Summer and summer. Oh, visitor from somewhere cold and gray, do you not see the decorative gourds of autumn around you? Do you not smell the pumpkin spice in the coffee, the muffins, the air freshener? We are passing through the aromatic doorway of fall as we speak, and we check the tropical disturbance reports only once a day. Because as we embrace autumn with all our sweaty hearts, we blow a bitter kiss to hurricane season, also known as season of the blue tarp, the ear blasting generator, the season of who has power, hauling tree limbs, and Jesus take the wheel. We have winter too, with snowflakes in classroom windows, menorahs in mangers, and twinkle lights in the palm trees. And on special days when the temperature plunges below 65, we have sweaters and boots. We have gorgeous camellias that wait for winter, a million buds among glossy dark leaves, dreaming of their own coming majesty. In early spring, camellias give up their glory to azaleas, their masses of blooms giving grace to the apartment complex, the mansion, the bungalow, the shopping plaza, the highway median. In spring, the oaks finally rain down acorns. They crunch under our feet on brick streets. Then May fills up with magnolia light, and crepe myrtles follow, those tall, generous ladies of pink and purple and white. We have seasons of the soul, too. We feed the hungry in times of feasting. We build, we gather what is needed. We remember the lonely in times of celebration. Under the same sun, we are fearful. We are happy. We are grieving. We are grateful. We have seasons of tears, of loss, of how can it happen here? Seasons when every sentence begins, quote, if we can get through this, end quote. Of holding the hands of strangers in a park and pushing forth the light in us, pushing through clouds of pain to the other side. We are flanked by angels. We have Pride season with its fierce, hopeful rainbows. We have seasons, all right. Termite season, mosquito season, football season, soccer season, tax season, magic season, prom season, rainy season, campaign season, protest season, flying palmetto bug season, and alligator mating season. But back to autumn, which may not look like scenes in children's books, with their apple picking and piles of yellow and red under the maple trees. Our season is more subtle. Every morning begins a new signal of the earth's shifting. Drive from here to the coast and see how a forest glints, more sage in the sun, and marsh grass ripples in a haze of gold. We know it's fall, not so much by the leaves, but by the light. That poem Fall was first performed at the city council meeting on October 23rd in 2017, when Susan Lilly was named the City of Orlando's inaugural poet laureate. So
I just want to pause because I know we're going to focus mostly on your poem afterwards, but I have to say I love that poem so much on its own. And as a person who has grown up in California and spent a long time in Southern California specifically, I so identify with that. Because for us, the seasons are like just a very subtle shift of light. But you do have seasons. You know when it's Christmas time, even in Los Angeles. You know that it looks different. You've got the palm lights and this mainly it's the smell of different drinks coming out of coffee shops that really signals the change of the season. But yeah, that poem is lovely. And before we say too much more, I'm going to ask you to read. Actually, can I ask you to explain what a terminal is and then read your terminal?
Yes. That poem of Lily's is, one of my favorites, if not most favorite of theirs. And, usually the terminal form is a much shorter homage than, this was a very long terminal poem. And, the source was longer. So a terminal poem collects the end words of a published, well-known, sometimes famous work. And with those remaining end words in order, retaining the stanza breaks, a poet then creates a new poem to those end words. I'm an experimental poet, so this poem that I created is true to form. However, I don't always usually stay perfectly within those lines. And there's a little stretching, but really hardly any to mention. But, I hope folks consider that form and use it as a way into something unexpected. So my poem, after Susan Lilly's Fall. Sometimes a poem or a life is ordinary, like a day when a car slowly backs into your driver's side door and you hear good advice about insurances and turn radius And when you get home, dinner is waiting with green beans and several options for topping baked potatoes. Flavors and seasons marry and merge like days and seasons. Combine, run together. Ask me again if it's still summer. My favorite color has always been gray. Or is it gray? And I've loved the fall so much more than autumn, maybe because my soul's never needed spice. The irrelevance of fabric softener or air freshener compared with the deeper aromatics emanating from love exhausted and well worn, the confusing marquee moments in a day. I think you might be the one after all. This, our life's work, to fold towels, double check the locks, kiss your mouth in the middle of another season. They have their own hurricanes. Fool us that a generator is what's needed, or someone to trim the tree limbs while we roll the dice and spin the wheel. Even an argument is a classroom. Did Mary and Joseph fight about mangers? I really am glad you hired someone to cut the trees. I keep thinking about the coming weather and the temperature of our shared spaces and how much I'm looking forward to wearing my old boots to walk to my classroom, which won't see winter, the season or the song, until one more of us leaves. I used to love that line about purple mountains and majesty, until I learned there's more than glory seated in the hearts of people. Contempt blooms in nations and families, so complex. Everyone wants a cottage or a bungalow. No one wants to talk about median income or raising minimum wage finally. I can feel the squeeze and crunch as we each struggle through streets with only the small dreams left to follow, as my hair has gone almost completely white. Still, I never stopped feeling hungry, which is really a kind of hope that needed to know its own satisfaction is a celebration, not the wish to be happy, but choosing something more nuanced and grateful, leaning into each loss. One more here, a chime on my phone. This grown child I'm sending forth into his own pain, betting on his better angels. I never trusted rainbows. Right now it's golf, not soccer, a year with 2 Olympics plus a protest, since no one decides the convergence of athletic seasons alongside waxing virus seasons. But I keep hearing you say to stay in. You want to use the yellow bowls, while I still can't believe they cut so much of the trees. And maybe I liked the denser shade. This new cleared driveway is shifting sight lines. I think I can see the forest. I know I can see the sun, flare and relent, glaring gold. I feel the shedding. And inner fall, the first teenager leaves. Before bed, I still turn on the light.
Thank you, Nikki, for reading that. And yeah, I'm so happy to hear that poem. I was so happy when you read it at the reading the other night. I have my reasons for choosing this one. Uh, and I'll talk about what I love about it. But first, I do want to ask you, both of these are such long poems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my real question is, where do you get the guts to try doing a terminal with an already significantly longer poem? Like how was it for you writing this? And um, just tell me a little bit about that journey.
Mm-hmm. The process, I think, is a little softer as an experimental poet
Mhm.
because where I find myself is if it, doesn't work, it's just an experiment, so there's a playful lower stakes. And I
Mhm.
think that is, especially for those of us that have been writing a long time, we it's very difficult to shut off our editor. It's very difficult to you know, lower that voice of a critic, like, oh, that's trite. Oh, that's, something I've said before, that, instead of just writing, and letting the waves and the, the inspiration play itself out and then go back, you know? Um, and by working on a longer piece, that supports the quieting of the editor, because
Oh, yeah,
so
say
much
more about that.
yeah, there's so it's kind of like doing a half marathon, right? You have to stay with it or you don't get there. So by working on longer work, it keeps for me, in my experience, it keeps that evaluation experience, to the side for longer, you know. I kind of call myself a second page poet anyway. Like when I sit down to write, I'm always like, oh, I've been working on these ideas in my head and I'm ready to write. And here we go. It's me and the page and the magic. And it's going to, and I'm writing and I'm like, wow, this is really good. Like I usually don't write something this good this early on. And it's always a lie. And I don't get anything of any value until I write through the entire first page and get to the second page. So by working on longer pieces, I find that lets more generate and simmer and marry, and it's wonderful.
I love what you're saying here. One of the things that we talk about at the poetry salon with our adult students all the time is getting past the inner critic, having fun. I always give a prompt and then say, whoever writes the worst draft wins, because when you're not getting to that critical voice, when that you shut that critical voice off, that's when you can play, and that's when you can, of course, get into the better, more honest,
Right.
creative voice, I think. But that's an interesting thought too, is just if you're working on a longer piece, because I've heard other people say it's just the opposite. It's like, if you don't have enough time, then you're gonna go quickly and you don't have time to hear the inner critic. But the opposite could also be true.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, According to what you're saying, it's like, if you have more time, then you can get past that inner critical voice, and kind of have a process for getting past it and
For
getting
sure.
into a creative voice. That's great. I think it's kind of the same thing, but with different approaches
Mm-hmm.
and still with the same goal. So tell me a little bit about why you chose to do this with the poem Fall. Was
Mm-hmm.
that because the way I read your poem, it's not a response to
Right.
Susan Lilly's poem in content necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
but you are using so many of the same end words, but in I think the way I interpret it is like
Mm-hmm.
a completely different poem. So tell
Yeah,
me a little bit about the inspiration for it.
certainly. So Lily, of course, is quite well known and has quite a sizable presence here in Orange County and in the city of Orlando. We have a new poet laureate now. We actually have the search happening for our third poet laureate, but she was the first. And I think there is a significance to, um, what I call wet cement, anything that's in a wet cement stage, because it's cement, right? So it's not meant to be wet, but it is wet.
Mhm.
And I really saw her entire kind of office bringing that role to life and fleshing it out for the first time as a practice of wet cement.
Mhm.
And I wanted, as I mean, I'm active and visible in our literary and creative communities here in our state and local spaces as well. And I wanted something of mine to, intersect and connect with their work that would remain when that cement was hard, when it was firm,
Mhm.
when it was dry, you know? And this book was released during her tenure. And, it was a big fun celebration. We all celebrated and read and, bought and signed copies, and it was very great. And I think that's, it can sound like a difficult thing to say about our fellow writers, whether we know them or not, but there's something special about that poem. And I think we
Mhm.
have, our own connections and relationships and responses with texts. And I love it. And it is a weird space of kind of creative communion to be able to claim that relationship as a writer.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Susan and I are friends, but I decided to do this, and I really encourage my fellow writers and students when I'm working with to choose the same way we choose our family in real life, to choose your literary family and
Yeah.
allow your work to be present with theirs. So it was a really cool process, and kind of putting my money where my mouth is in doing that in a really embodied way.
I love that. And, it does put me in mind of a quote, and I don't know who said this, but that all art is kind of in conversation
Mhm.
with itself or with each other. All of us are really having this long conversation with the writers of the past, and we're leaving something for the presumed writers of the future. And that's part of why I love that quote that you sign off your emails with, because for so much of us, I think the joy of doing this is that we get to share with other people.
Mhm.
I don't know how many of us are going to get to be worldwide famous poets,
Sure.
but everyone I know who is a writer who's been published or hasn't been published, they have their poetry community, and you see them in workshop, like um learning from each other. This is such a fun assignment, the terminal poem. I'm tempted to take some poems from people I know and friends of mine and like just write terminal poems out of gratitude and
Mhm.
appreciation of their work. I'm tempted to do it with poets whose work I'm not like at all, and see if
Yes.
that,
Yes.
helps me. And then also to do it with the poets who I do know and resonate with, because I'm sure it'll help me get like, help me kind of do something very natural with my own voice.
Mhm.
Um, I'm going to tell you now why I love this poem. That's the real fun thing that I got to do, is now I get to
Thank you.
fangirl and gush. But I remember hearing you read this at our reading, and there's a lot working in this poem, but the line that really got me was, and I'm gonna paraphrase it, but this is our life's work to fold the towels.
Mhm.
A lot of this poem seems to be about the quotidian, like with that opening line, some poems and lives are ordinary, and it's about being person in the world, motherhood, domesticity, sending a child off to college, and that line about, well, this is our life's work, maybe this is our life's work, just folding the towels. Can you tell me a little bit about that line
Mhm.
and how you meant it?
Yeah. That's one of my favorite parts also. Super cool. Thanks for picking up that thread. I since I was very young, have been asking that question, what is my life's work? What is my, challenge, my vocation? Like, I think when I was like, I definitely remember asking when I was 6. I feel like maybe when I was 4, but I don't fully trust that memory. Um, and I remember thinking, I think I get a pretty solid like B plus in life. I'm not really great at anything, but I'm good at a lot. And that is, I mean, I was never satisfied with that. I was very unhappy with it. I would really love to be the best, I don't know, spitballer ever if I could do nothing else or
Mhm.
whatever. And so it's a lifelong kind of wrestling. And I think of it as how we work the clay.
Mhm.
Where am I now? What do I see here? What do I see other people doing it? Pulling it almost the way you see taffy made in candy stores. You see them pull it, and the machines are turning, and the pulling, and the colors change, and the stretching, and that the answer changes every time, right? And I also have found that parenthood specifically, there's so many scripts with that, right? Like our culture might, as for all that they don't give us a handbook on how to be a good parent, They
No.
sure give us all the scripts of what we're supposed to be saying, that you know, can you just see the glow of fulfillment about being a parent, you know? And that was not my experience, you know, those were not my words, and it didn't fit. And there were gifts and costs that were not in the script for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I do want more in many ways, you know, in art, in relationships, in community, even in achievement. And you know, the kind of gifts of my 40s and 50s, I think, is the recognition of what, you know, the word ordinary is present in the word extraordinary. It's there too, you know? So what are the gifts of the ordinary and the lessons of the ordinary and the music of the ordinary? So
Yeah.
what, you
The
know,
music of the ordinary. I love that. That's a great, is that the title of your next book? That could be the
right?
title. If you don't take it, I'm taking it. The music of the ordinary. That's great. If I may say something, and first of all, like, I think this is why I'm drawn to some of your work. You and I have some similar thoughts on that. I'm sure maybe everyone is, maybe every poet is, but like I've always wondered, what the hell, you know, what are we doing here? What's this all about? And I think it's very American probably to have this idea that if you do something spectacular in your career and you become the GOAT, the greatest of all time at something, like that will make you feel fulfilled. And if you're any lesser than that, then you've failed as a person, you know? And I think we're maybe now starting to question whether that's true. I heard something years ago that really helped me, because my master's is in the psychology of creativity. And I remember hearing a lecture by someone I'm pretty sure is named Dean Symington. And you're going to have to do more research if you want to find the exact quote and stuff. But he basically had done some research on who, on creativity and leadership. And what he said is like, the person who can be the greatest leader is the person who has the average IQ of your average college graduate. And if you're any more intelligent than that, you're less able to lead people because you can't relate to them and they can't relate to you. And ever since then, I've thought, well, I got into college. And I am probably not going to distinguish myself by being the greatest this, that, or the other thing. But hey, maybe that's good. That means I can, you know, I can move something forward in terms of creative leadership because I can identify with a lot of people. And not a lot of them are from Mensa.
Mm-hmm.
You
True.
know, like you can't lead the people unless you love the people. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so I think that's something to consider. And when I hear that line about, well, hey, maybe this is our life's work is to fold the towels, I have to tell you, the first thought I had was like, she's being sarcastic, right?
Mm-mm.
Maybe she's being sarcastic in this poem. The more I've thought about it, I'm like, no, we do spend a lot of our lives folding towels, and that work is pretty meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to take that line as a sincere line.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and
really special, I think, to think of the ways we embed care for our bodies and our the bodies of our people. I mean, we're used to that in spaces of cooking and food. But that is not my language. I really
yeah,
love when somebody cooks for me. It is not a sign that I don't love you, that I'm not going to cook for you. Um, and me tending to the spaces your body inhabits, like
yeah.
towels, sheets, you know, shoes that fit. That is an act of love and care and presence.
Hmm.
And I do think that there is a poetics about the
Yeah.
body in those spaces.
No, absolutely. And I think really the problem is not with us, the caretakers who do all of this. The problem is with society not recognizing how valuable and necessary it is. You know, like all of us are here and we're all still alive and we're able to build skyscrapers and stuff like that
Mhm.
only because for millions of years, whatever, many years, people have been chopping onions and putting them in our stew and putting them in our
Yeah.
mouth and doing all that other caretaking
Mhm.
work. And it's just, I think it needs that recognition, which sometimes, you know, that's what poetry can do is provide
Mhm.
it that recognition and give it to other folks. Um, yeah, so I love that piece.
Mhm.
And that line particularly caught me.
Mhm.
But so much of the rest of it really is working, especially when you get to that ending line about um I don't want to bastardize it. Will you go ahead and read the last line again?
Yes. Yes. The very end, before
Hmm.
bed, I still turn on the light. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. That's just lovely.
Yeah.
And uh I'm thinking about that in relationship to the Susan Lilly poem about how we
Mhm.
measure our
Mhm.
seasons in light.
Yes.
Like before bed, I still turn on the light. And like such different uses of the word light. And yet, like, you know, there's certain words with poems that are just
Ugh,
like,
I
that's
know.
gotta be the ending word, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like for me, it's like home, moon, stars, light. If I
Mhm.
hit one of those words, I know that's the end of the poem. And I've struggled really hard to try to figure out like how do I keep it fresh? You had said something about that earlier about keeping it fresh. I'm really curious, like what are your techniques for
You
making
know,
sure you
it's
don't get too
so
repetitive?
funny to hear you say that. I made a list years ago, maybe 20 years ago, of words that, one could say are overused. And
Mm-hmm.
yet they are still not trite, like the words you're saying, moon,
Mm-hmm.
home. Um, and that is a mystery to me that we have
Mm-hmm.
those words. And as as much has been said with and through and about them, they are not exhausted,
Yeah,
and I think
never.
they're nowhere close. I think they're
Yeah.
nowhere close.
No, it's just, I mean, we're never gonna get tired of seeing the moon in a poem, the stars, the ocean,
Right.
mom, mother.
Yeah.
What are some of yours? I mean, just the ones that you have on that list. You
Um,
don't have to pull up the whole
I will
thing.
tell you, I have moved a little from words to sounds,
Okay.
and I have many pages. I love to write, to compose on the page, and I have many pages where I write at the top margin the sounds that I want to use, and they tend to be linguistically um, harder sounds, right? Like
Mhm.
K, T, um, like a hard G. And I'll make sounds that I don't want to use, like the WH in
Uh-huh.
many question words, which actually, to be a total nerd about it, when we say what or where or something, there it's WH, but the way our mouth pronounces it is the way it was said in Middle English. And so we actually say the H first, which is why those sounds are very breathy, because
Yeah.
there's that H is right in the front of the word. So
Mhm.
anyway, I've been working a lot with what sounds I want to use in the language, not just sounds, that I want to bring out, like ring. And there is a freshness, I think, to all of our stages and phases, like of seasons of life,
Yeah.
when we realize that, similar to that, those words, how many people have, reached middle age, right? And it's still not trite, it's still not over explored. So um I think recognizing the freshness that is already present is
Hmm.
is part of the work, right? And we've been doing this a long time, Tresha. Like, we don't say things like true blue. You know what I mean? We've left those things behind a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's a really, I think, space of renewal to listen to the sounds of the words and, um, you know, kind of press on all of those sonic spaces.
This leads me to another question, and maybe I should have asked this earlier, but you define yourself as an experimental poet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, like, what does that mean to be an experimental poet? Aren't we all experimenting? How is that? How is that for you?
Yeah, it's so cool. I definitely think that most people are, except it's really just like any identity, right? You are if you say you are. It was a practice that I did not know about, even though I knew about a lot of experimental work, like the concrete poets and things like that, until I was studying my MFA and came across some incredible artists and writers, and I don't even know what the word is if you're both, where they were creating a space in language that was kind of beyond language, that recognized that language itself is a structure, it's a construct.
Yeah.
We have to be taught to speak even our, quote unquote native language. You have to be taught it. We have a million other ways of communicating without that.
Yeah.
And understanding that a book can be an unbound deck of pages. What do we consider containers to be? What if the language itself is part of the material?
Mm-hmm.
My favorite poem by Nikki Giovanni is called My House, which I became my favorite poem when I was in undergrad. And she says, English isn't a good language to express emotion through. Mostly, I imagine, because people try to speak English instead of trying to speak through it.
Mm, mm.
And I remember creating, poems out of pencil shavings. I had a friend who was an art teacher, and I'm like, save don't throw them away. Like, save them all. I need enough to make a poem out of them.
Yeah.
So much wax, like so much water, so many different materials, and seeing language as stretchy and you know unlocking like where the words are on the page and where they are next to each other. So it's a really playful approach, I think, especially for people like us that love linguistics and roots and all of that like fun generative space of like, where does this word come
Mm-hmm.
from and what does this mean and how can I use it in different ways. And this word is inside another word, but that's not really a root. It's just so fascinating. So that experimental nature of, or as a practice, really, that like whatever I, bring to some kind of life, in a space or on a page, is also going to surprise me and be an encounter for me as the poet. Who was that prose writer that said, was it Hemingway? No tears,
Oh
no
yeah, no,
tears in the writer.
I believe that's Robert Frost. That's the
Mm,
one who gets the
right.
attribution anyways.
Yeah.
No tears in the reader, no tears in the writer, no tears in the
Yeah.
reader. So you have to surprise yourself.
So
Would you
yeah.
say this is I've heard this another term for this, and it's like, like the language poets, the language deconstructionist poets, and it's like
Mm.
we're trying to kind of examine what language itself is, not just how it means, but what it is as a material itself. And on that subject, do you speak other languages?
So that question when people say like, are you wealthy? And they say, no, I'm not wealthy. My parents are wealthy. And so
Okay.
you're like, well, then you kind of are. You know what I mean? Like you
Yes,
sort of,
yeah, definitely.
so I would not say I'm fluent in another language, but I have like emerging fluencies building in many languages. Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Latin, ASL, all things that I studied and returned to, and am interested in that as also a space, also a container of encounter.
Yeah,
I
yeah. So
had
I think it's fair to say you know more than the average bear about how English is different from other
yeah.
languages. Yeah. And what are the languages your parents speak?
Um my mom was she both was Native American and Irish, but she was a great English teacher, like old
Hmm.
school literature. And my dad was from an immigrant Sicilian family where they understood
Wow.
Italian, but they were not taught to speak it. And the adults, my
Hmm.
grandparents, wanted to speak Italian so they could speak more or less privately,
Yeah.
but the kids could understand it. Of course they could. Um, but they didn't learn to make the language. And so it was a really sad, I think that's a common immigrant story, right? It was a really sad
Yes.
loss of assimilation.
Yeah.
And there isn't anyone to make that sound. I mean,
Hmm.
Italian is spoken, but my dad can't hear my grandmother's voice.
Mm. Mm.
So I just think it's really interesting. I've had some real close collaborative relationships with translators as well and
Mm.
interpreters. And then, what are those spaces and how we change the experience of translation is the first act of translation is our experience and our emotion into language.
Yes.
So when we say something is lost, moving something from like Spanish to English, it couldn't possibly be because something was transformed in entering into language. So it's just these like remediated experiences of communication. I mean, I'm a total geek about this stuff, but but
No,
how
this
cool is
is
it to think about the role of translations and how that opens up parts of a text and also maybe closes other parts of it.
Yeah, no, I very much geek out on this and probably don't use it as much in my writing as I could, but when I hear it, I get really fascinated by it. And especially learning new things about language. Like when we lived in Costa Rica and I was trying to learn Spanish, what I learned is you don't say like I go to the store. The fact that you're saying it implies an I, and then how you conjugate the verb implies whether it's we or the, tense form or whatever. So you don't say I, you go through your day talking about things, but without saying the I. And I always thought like, what does that do? And what would that do to language if you just remove the I? What would that do to our consciousness?
Mhm.
Um, there was another really, Borges, Jorge, as I like to call him, Jorge Luis Borges, Argentinian Jewish writer. Um, I don't think he was Argentinian by nationality. I like, his family had immigrated. But anyways, so he has some great stuff like that. And I can't remember the name of this one short story he has, but he posits like a language where everything is a verb. There are no nouns, there's only verbs. So you wouldn't say the moon is rising over the hills, you would say it moons over the hills.
Mm,
And I'm just like, oh, that's so interesting.
that's
And
so
sometimes I'll
interesting.
go like talk with friends, just be like, how long can we sustain this different language?
Yes, yes, yes. I had a really good friend that I met through that MFA program who was a native English speaker and um, you know, brought Spanish into their lives as a high school and college student, and
Mhm.
then became, incredibly fluent. And it was very much their, part of their adult life. And I was interviewing, like informally, I was interviewing them, and they said, if you do not speak to me and know me in Spanish, then you don't know like the
Yeah.
realest parts of me. And
Yeah.
they said, because they spoke Spanish with their partner and their child, and they said, Spanish is my language of intimacy.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was the most beautiful thing, that and that to be aware of it, you know, I mean, you could have experienced that without being aware of it or being able to articulate it, but they you know, poet, right, they so beautifully understood the role of language as movement, you know, and relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the language that is so important, and it is so intimate how we connect with other people. I'm always really interested when I hear stories of like two people who don't speak the same language, but they see each other across a room and they just know that they have to be together. And I'm like, for me, that would be so alien. You know, like I couldn't imagine feeling close to someone if we did not speak the same language. I have people in my life who I love and respect and am close with, for whom English is not their first language,
Mhm.
but we can connect because we speak it, you know, one language or the other, common language enough that we can communicate. But I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know how I could connect with
Yes.
someone even though our language was totally different. And yet for some people, you know, it's not their thing. It's not their thing, you know.
Mhm.
So I give credence to understanding that for some of us this is the primary thing, and for other people, like, you know, it might be cooking or some other
For sure.
communication language. I think this brings me to the next
Yes.
question, which is would you read the poem that you chose,
Oh
and
my
then we'll
gosh.
have a little discussion
Yes, of
about that
course.
one.
Yes, 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 of course. So this poem is called An Offering. It's in this collection, Sunflowers Rising, which was a collective effort to support children in Ukraine.
Yeah.
An offering. I'd make a space for them. Them is us, is we, is many, is all. To encounter what is lost, traces, layers, a ritual, and invite them slash us slash you to welcome the material and the acts of making, a way of engaging. What does and does not make sense, what dies, what continues torn, to experiment, to question, to cut, to cull, to heal, to see, asking, where do we locate consolation amid desolation? What comes from creation? From our willingness to witness when the tropics spiral and the mountainsides slide, to unsuture the land, the riverbanks, ourselves, the legacies of our great losses, the call with all of history, a collaboration. As we stitch and heat and attach and carve and write our way again. What cries out to be witnessed, heard, healed, questioned? What happens at the softening? Accompanying this offering is my cup of loss. Running over, it meets yours. Living waters, spirit filled, acts of presence. We, the vessels of time and tenderness. Here, drink.
Um, so tell me a little bit about why you chose that poem and what it means for you.
One, I think, is like a special quality of that piece is that it is not meant to be black ink on a page. It's meant to
Mm,
be spoken aloud. And it was written as part of a poetry evening in celebration of Ukraine.
mhm.
And I was hosting, and I felt this, you know, this draw to bring my own unknowing and offer something in a space where other people were really unsure, uncertain. And I think that it's a gift to be able to speak it aloud, so thank you for inviting me to do that. Words like here are meant to be all the ways that we receive that word, right? And on the page it's only one. Understanding a word like we. I mean, I know we're speaking English in the United States, but we also means small. It can also mean late, like the wee hours of the morning. And there's a real beauty in how we draw language into our sound, into ourselves through sound. So, and I think when we are talking about distance, which we are with the experience of, the suffering and real, challenges happening in so many lands, the way we get there is by listening. The way we close that distance, the way we cover that distance is by hearing the stories. And anyway, so it's very, very special. It maybe is not the most technically brilliant thing I've ever written, but it means a lot to me.
The listening to you speak it, because I don't know if I've heard you speak it before. I've only I think I've only read it on the page, but hearing you speak it, I'm even more aware of like the rhythms, those repeated infinitives, to this, to this, to this, to this. And I can understand why it's a poem meant to be spoken out loud. And isn't that sometimes a little frustrating as
Yes.
page poets? You're like, one of the things we try to do at the Poetry Salon, is people read their poetry out loud, they hear it. There's that great phrase that the ear is the best editor. And hopefully by hearing it, you can do something. And I'm often working with folks, especially those who really write in prose, to say like, look, if you want to have a pause, put in a line break. Or while you're reading this, I see that you are not having line breaks where you have some natural pauses. And we try to kind of, use line breaks and how it appears on the page to give the reader directions on how it should be read. But it's not the same thing as getting to actually read it out loud yourself.
Yes. And I maybe that's part of my experimental heritage. But I was also like an old school grammarian, and I really love like the weird, obscure like rules of English language that come from French and Latin. And that's how I was taught to read poetry, right? Like the punctuation, it's almost, to me, the placement on a page are the stage directions, right, to reading the poem. And in debates, right, we say, well, that can't be that because there's a semicolon there, so this is a new idea. And that is accurate for those writers because they were writing to use those tools in that way, right?
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting, I think, like, other than the language itself, right, another language, giving meaning. And I really am so in a collaborative space. And I have a poem. This poem is written on a box, and it's meant so that, like, if it were hanging somewhere, you, the reader, construct the poem.
I want to pause for a second here, because you did tell me like that your second chosen poem would be the cube one. And since we're on YouTube and we can do visuals, why don't you hold up that cube poem and say a little bit more about it?
It's really big. It's bigger than I have to like zoom back.
Okay.
And each face has text on it. in different orientations,
Okay.
so that you, the reader, you could also infuse. First of all, you're constructing the poem, because where does it start? Where does it end? Right? You
Mm-hmm.
can spin it back and you can repeat a line. And it means the same to me, approaching the way that we conceive of visual art, like on a wall. We say that the painting happens in the mind of the beholder, right? That we're bringing our own meaning and experience to that painting. We're seeing
Mm-hmm.
our own life in there somewhere. We try to find connection, right? And the painting happens in the space of being seen. If it's just hanging on a wall and there's nobody there, it's like the tree in the forest, right? Like, is it even like visual art of any significance? There's no one there to see it.
Yeah.
And I super love what's happening in other spaces where paintings are being interpreted into almost um, topographical maps, so people with different sight abilities can feel the work.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But that notwithstanding, this is it's sort of like when you walk into a room and somebody said, "Oh, Tresha, like, we love you and we want you to be here." And you walk into the room and you're like, "Yeah, not really. Like, this isn't really my space." And so not that the, invitation was false, but it doesn't go like deep all the way down. Like, when
Yeah.
you're welcome somewhere. And
Yeah.
when you encounter a poem like this, you are welcome here. It's
Mm.
not, I have not taken up all of the space. There is a space, a huge amount of space for the encounter with the reader, because the poem doesn't exist without your interaction and manipulation and co-construction, and hopefully, extra hopefully, when you encounter something like this, kind of like a Rothko, right? You think, I think I can do that. I think I know, and
Mm-hmm.
there is, to me, more, more wealth in that space of returning to your own like life and world with, a little extra inspiration to be like creative and make something. If you're like, oh my God, I didn't know I could make a poem out of my Amazon box, I'm gonna go do that.
You're saying that cube is about making the reader feel more welcomed. Some people, and I think actually, like, maybe this is more what people say, what I hear in college and academics and whatever. Some people could also say, well, this is also challenging the reader.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And it took me years to understand what people meant when they said, like, oh, this poem, the poem is meant to challenge you.
mm-hmm.
No problem understanding when someone says this poem is challenging. That I understand. But this poem is like intentionally meant to challenge you. And what I think that means is, like, yeah, it's not really complete on its own. It's asking you to do some of the work. It's
Mm-hmm,
asking you some questions. It's asking
mm-hmm,
you a question, as opposed to what we usually are
mm-hmm,
taught that you're
mm-hmm,
supposed to do with language is give answers. And it seems like that cube is a perfect example. It's like
mm-hmm,
the cube is meant to be experienced by you, and you're supposed to participate in making the meaning of it. It's
mm-hmm,
not there saying, this is my meaning. It's
mm-hmm,
saying, here I am. What do you want to do with me? Or another, I think Thomas Merton gave this example as, like, what is an apple? An apple is really not, what is the taste of an apple? The taste of the apple comes when you bite into it, and it's like
mm-hmm.
your
Right.
mouth eating the apple. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what
Yeah.
poetry is
Mm-hmm.
like you meeting the poem, and then the
Mm-hmm.
meaning is what you make by that encounter.
Yeah. That's
I'm
gorgeous.
This is a new question I'm starting to ask poets, and I think with your background in experimental poetry, you might be a good poet to ask. Like, now that AI is able to generate poems of differing quality, what are your thoughts on that, especially in the classroom? Like, what are some ways teachers can adjust the curriculum to get beyond AI or do things that AI can't do. I'm thinking that cube is a pretty good example. I don't think AI can create something like that quite yet.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. I will say them briefly.
Hmm.
I teach and facilitate, creative writing primarily. It is difficult to me that somebody would want to study that in a classroom, craft centered, you know what I mean? The kind of exploration, right? That really is about um learning, learning what this is and what is possible. That is very difficult to do if we outsource the production of the lines.
Hmm.
So, and my university does not allow creative writing students to do that, right? You have to write, even if you're in another creative writing class, everything you have to write in this class has to be new for that course, right?
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
interesting. So, we've had AI a lot longer than we think, like the boom of 2022. Um, I mean, we could always, like for the last 10 years, you could Google, like, where is Minneapolis? That was the same thing, you know? We
Hmm.
just didn't call it, we didn't call it AI. And that remix, the possibility of remixing, kind of every text available to the from these models, these large language models, um, is definitely on a scale that puts it in the hands of like a more common user, right? Instead of just
Hmm.
coders. And I'm thankful to have studied it myself at the university level and the origins of them. Like there's really cool tools like um Twine and Bitsy, which people can look up later about like how to code in very accessible ways what is basically a mini language model and learn how these things work. But if I put in in a bank of text 25 words, then that's all the model can pull from, right? It's all there
Yeah.
is, even though it's like Fibonacci, right? But there's still a finite number of combinations of those words. They're called strings in coding, and which is super beautiful, right? And these models are just so very difficult for us humans to conceive of, but they are still actually discrete numbers and countable words, right? Even if it's millions or trillions or whatever, right? You could
Hmm.
still count them. And I really want, I mean, I'm thirsty for the surprising insight that happens in a moment of that recognition of like, oh, you too, right? Like I
Hmm.
didn't know um you also understood whatever interesting and weird poetic expression you just wrote about, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh my god, I felt like that. I just didn't know that I was having the feeling of like my eyes on the outside of my body, but you wrote about it and now I know there's a word for it, you know what I mean? And those kinds of like, I don't know, like recognized weirdness aren't possible with AI. It's
Hmm.
the old experiment, could you put, a primate in a room and eventually he would type out Hamlet
Yeah.
randomly?
Yeah.
That's the same thing, right? They have all the letters. But man, those letters, and the space of relationship that we combine and create, dissonance and concert. Why do you want to, you know, take yourself out of that? You, the
I know.
artist,
And
you know?
I mean, that is part of the challenge I think that we're facing right now is like, I mean, with school, with K through 12, you are asking people to be deeply invested in something that very frankly and frequently they didn't ask to be that they're not invested in. They didn't choose to be invested in. I'd like to think at the college level it's easier, but I think it's like
Mhm.
now we just expect everyone goes to college. So now it's like college is the new high school, your master's program, maybe that's
Right.
where teaching gets easier because you really are working with
Yeah,
people who really care.
that's right. It
But
changes
up
them.
until that, it's like, look, you do this because you love it. And if you don't love it, of course you're finding a way around it.
Yeah.
And so, like, our challenge as teachers and educators is how do you get kids to just fall in love with language, or
Yeah.
at least be interested and curious enough that they want to do it for their own reasons and not for their grade. And
It's a strange space
yeah,
to be in because, you know, I just started a new semester and I have my students write me a letter and they all say, like, I've been waiting for this class. I've been doing all these other classes I don't care about so I can get to this one, you know? I've been, I think I can do this. I think I'm a good writer. I think I can learn, you know what I mean? They all
yeah.
say, it's so refreshing, and you can hear their voices, their themness is right there,
Mhm.
rushing to meet me because I said come to the table, right? Like let's eat together, and
Yeah.
I have a friend that founded a journal that deliberately uses AI in the creation of creative texts. And it's super interesting. There's some really cool work. Rosa Alcala did a gorgeous poem that's on SoundCloud called Mother Tongue with the slash between the M and the O for my other tongue. And
Yeah.
she actually used her own text and put it through a digital voice because the poem is about the gaps in understanding between her and her mother through Spanish and English. And
Yeah.
the digital voice glitches in some of those words and meanings, and it's a really beautiful space of misunderstanding, and I
Yeah.
think it speaks to what we miss, right, in the people even right in front of us. um I'm really interested in the glitch. I love the glitch. And I hope that people use these tools, to sort their, am I spending money on matchbooks or pens, and
Yeah.
not like what is the experience of my life after a car accident,
So I have to be honest, like I talk a lot about AI. I'm curious about AI. I know a little bit about how it's used, but then there are some questions I get to where I'm like, can AI do that? Like if I go now and I put in what is the meaning of life, or like what is my, if I put in something really personal, like, how did I feel about my 12th birthday? Like, is it going to give me a poem? Is it going to tell me how I felt?
Yeah.
I mean, is it reading my mind, or is it like,
Yeah.
as far as I know, it hasn't gotten to that point yet.
So there's a tool you should look up, and hopefully your awesome community might check it out, called Eliza. And Eliza was one of the first natural language processing like pieces of software or something. And it was a psychology. Um, so like you could talk to it, and you would type into Eliza, like, I'm having a bad day. And Eliza would display text that said, like, tell me more. How does that make you feel? And
Mm-hmm.
Eliza was generated in, I want to say, like in the 60s. It's really old, and it's
Oh,
really
wow.
interesting to play with. And I think that's the big jump in what we identify as AI now, is the natural language processing. Like, it's not in code, like we're using what we call natural language, right? And I want people to do it, but I want people to be critical about it. I want
Yeah.
people to read the code. Like, all you have to do is click inspect source and you can see the actual code on any website, and it'll say things like, the image description, it'll say like, person or whatever. And there always is something else there. There's always some other modifier, some use of language. Even the files are still, they're still called master and slave in
Ooh,
many
wow.
coding. um that's some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I want people to look under the surface, And that's I think the gift of poetics, right? That's what I mean, that's what we do here. It's not extra.
Right.
We look under the surface, you know?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I really don't want to ever just assume like because something new it's bad. I do
Of
think, and
course.
I've talked about this with Joseph Fasano, I think was the last interview we released, and talking about like what do we do? And he said something really wise. I think I'm characterizing it correctly, that, every time there's a new technology, human beings
Mhm.
are called upon um, to, figure out how do we use that technology instead of letting it use us. We
Mhm.
have that opportunity to do that now. And so, yeah, I think there's some great things AI can do. I mean, it can search the internet for everything ever made and tell me, who thought this about what, or, you
Mhm.
know, after analyzing all this data, the best thing is this. But it is always going to be faulty,
Mhm.
or always
Incomplete. I
risk
will
being
say it's
faulty. Yeah,
incomplete.
incomplete. But I mean, I think even as poets, it can do some interesting things. Like I
Mhm.
heard about the book Travesty Generator,
Mhm.
and because I'm AI, I don't know immediately who wrote it. I am gonna have to look it up. Travesty Generator. And it's a book of poems that Lillian Yvonne Bertram, a book of poetry that is it I don't know exactly that it's AI generated, as in like she had control over what she was doing, but it does
Mhm.
use AI. Like the writer did use AI to create it. And I'm just gonna be flat out honest. I don't know that I understand the book. I don't know that I understand what's going
I
on.
will
I
tell you,
need a
Bertram
book
is a
group.
coder. Like their background
Okay.
is in coding. They are next level digital humanities. Um, they've been doing this a long. I mean, they're young person, but I mean, they've been doing this a long time. We collaborated on an artist book together
Oh my
called
God. That's awesome.
yeah, it's called Defibrillator, and
Uh-huh.
we sourced material from our own, both of our own experiences in like healthcare and medicine, and conceptualizing the breach between care for the body, or like and how we enter a body, where are there spaces, where are there sutures. And weirdly and wonderfully, I called a million places to try to get a defibrillator cabinet because that's what I wanted it to be in. And somebody gave me one. They were like, we can't sell these to you. Like, it's wrong. It's unethical. And I'm like, I promise it's for art. It's not, I promise. And I finally found someone that was like, well, we have all these old ones that are trash. I'll just send you one. And I mean,
Wow.
so cool. But Bertram is an incredible, incredible poet, teacher, writer, all the things. And they understand. What I love about their work is they have a fluency, like we were talking about our languages, right? They have a fluency in digital languages and in coding that I think is really spectacularly surprising and interesting.
Hmm.
And a way in, it's an invitation. um I think when we see those things happening, and that's true of any kind of writing, I think, Trisha, you might agree with that. Any kind of writing that's like lazy, and um when we let ourselves off the hook, that's a mistake, you know,
Yes.
whether it's honesty or pain or whatever else, or digital, we
Yeah.
shouldn't. There's so many poems. I'm sure you've seen it in your work with students and emerging writers, where, I can see how close you are, and I can see you chose to stop. Don't stop.
Yeah.
Go back and go all the way. And you don't have to show it to me. You don't have to send it out to be published, but write it down all the way. And then decide if you want to show it to someone. Don't stop before it's
Yeah. Yes.
alive,
Yeah. Hmm.
So that's what I want to see people do using those tools of technology, you know, go all the way with some kind of like spirit and craft of like insight and creativity, not a space of like, well, I need a word that rhymes with thesaurus, you know, like, who cares? That's not interesting, you know?
Yeah. Well, and at the same time, like sometimes when you are distracting yourself with a game, like, well, what's the word that rhymes with thesaurus? Like, not always, but sometimes you do get something really surprising that
Yeah.
Accidentally tells you a truth that you
Yes.
weren't even aware, wasn't really there before, so that I mean, to me, that's kind of what surrealism is, which
It is
is like,
so.
let's do some accidents, let's
Mhm,
see what's a
mhm.
happy accident and what can we make with this happy accident. And sometimes we wind up saying things that might be true, but that's the difference, like, and that's the difference, I think, between where AI is at and what poetry is at. Like, AI can generate the thing, but it takes a human being to read it and go
Mhm.
like, that's just ridiculous word salad versus that's a happy accident. That really
Mhm,
speaks to me.
mhm.
It's weird, but it also means something, because like making meaning is something that
Yeah.
happens with humans. I don't know if computers can feel that or recognize what is
I
meaningful.
think
That
what you're calling on is sort of like the, you know, like the judgment of, something special happening,
yeah,
and I don't know that. I mean, I think that's dangerous criteria in general when it comes to art, but there is a recognition of something that's profound, something. And I don't know that a computer can come to that conclusion. It can
yeah.
generate the thing, right? But to say this was profound, I don't know,
Well,
at
they
least
can
not
say
yet.
like, this has been called profound by all these other
Right.
voices,
Right.
widely regarded as the most profound thing ever written.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not recognizing it itself. It's just synthesizing
Mm-hmm.
the material and saying,
Yeah.
like, according 9 out of 10 people found this profound.
I will tell you the very small handful of people that have asked to read my dissertation, I have given it to them in a physical copy because I don't want it in the language models if I can help it.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay,
Mm.
I'm really afraid to ask this question because it's gonna make me feel so dumb. Nikki, what is your dissertation? What is your dissertation about? Don't tell me
The
the
okay,
answers. Just what
it's
question were
all
you
come
seeking
down
to
to this.
solve?
Trisha, can I say it in less than like 10 minutes? Yes, I can.
Yes. Yeah.
The title is Transformative Pedagogies.
Okay, that's
And
not too scary. I know both
it's
of those words.
right. That's the point. Like,
Okay.
and it's meant to um explicitly address that we can do the work, the energy and the effort in our learning spaces, all classrooms, libraries, any learning space where we embed community along with the content. And usually we're used to doing things in learning spaces like we do like a get to know you 10 minutes or even a get to know you week, right?
Hmm.
And then we drop it. And actually, what we've learned in like as in research spaces like Black trans feminisms, but also in Indigenous scholarship, is that, and of course I'm sure we all already knew this, we just forget it, that where we learn is in community. That's where we
Yes.
learn. That's how we
Yeah.
learn music, how we learn cooking. And even if we're actually physically alone, we aren't, we have with
Yeah.
us, communities. That's what people say. Like my whatever that book for gifted children was like, some of my best friends are books. That's a community, you know. We're
Yes.
in
Yeah.
communion with writers across generations. That's why we love writing, because we're like, oh my God, you understand person from the 1800s.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank God
Yes.
for Anne of Green Gables. I didn't know, that I wasn't the only one. And um so my dissertation is both a model and a theoretical. It's like a model of doing it, and it's also a theoretical approach of like integrating, I call it a braid. Like we're braiding together all these theories and practices to keep embedding community, you know, all the way down, like all the way down.
I gotta say, like these are challenging times. When I hear you saying something like this, or I've been kind of delving more and more into the world of ecofeminism
Yes,
lately,
so similar.
reading Sweetgrass
Of
by
course.
Robin, and
Hmm.
I have a blank space. I can never remember her last name, but reading Sweetgrass,
Kimmerer.
Kimmerer,
Mhm.
it does make me feel like, oh, maybe we'll come out of this okay. Like
Mhm.
maybe right now it feels like a lot of the forces are about divide and conquer, separate.
Mhm.
Um, you know, there's an epidemic of loneliness, and
Mhm.
one of the big fears about AI taking over and everything is it's going to make us even less reliant on other people. We'll all be able to just plug into a machine and not
Mhm.
work with other people, and that's going to really screw up the brain.
Mhm.
Not to mention the social collapse and everything else, but I think it is also having an equal and opposite reaction. Like so many people now are going like, I was okay with where things are going, but now I'm not anymore. Now I'm starting to feel some pain, and so now I'm reinvestigating um some of the things we're losing and thinking about how do we incorporate those things in. Like how do we incorporate community, how do we make sure we're putting community connection at the front of our goals and
Mhm.
not losing it. So yeah, your dissertation doesn't scare me nearly as much as I thought it would.
Good.
Yeah,
You
it
still
makes me
don't need to
feel
read it though.
I'll let you give me the cliff notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're past the hour mark, which
Yeah.
I fully
So
expected would
fun.
happen. But thank you so much for being here. And, you know, poets, listeners out there, you can, Nikki, how is the best way for people to reach you?
On the social world, right? My
Yeah.
pretty much any platform, I'm at by Nikki Nikki Barnes Barnes and bynikkibarnes.com, same thing. And I'm excited to be completing a workshop with the Poetry Salon, which hopefully will be archived or something somewhere
Oh,
in
yeah,
your wonderful
definitely.
catalog. Yes. So
It's going to be online. Nothing that's done online gets totally lost.
that's right.
ABC, always be creating content.
Yes. Yes. This has been the most fun. You are just an incredible community builder and poet
Thank you.
and cultivator of all these incredible creative spaces. And I love getting to be part of it.
Yeah, and you know why that is? Because I only have the IQ of your average college graduate. If my IQ were any higher, I would probably be, I don't know what I'd be doing. I honest to God don't know what I would be doing. Because nothing interests me more than this, to be honest. Maybe I'd be doing it, but I'd be using words that most people don't. And I'd be alienating a lot of, I don't know. Who knows? Anyways, I don't have to find out because I am who I am. Nikki, thank you so much for being here. And I'm gonna stop the record button. But one more time, I will say, please check out also our reading with you and Angela Torres. That is up. You know what? I think it's not quite up. We recorded it. I have it posted on
Mhm.
YouTube, but it'll be up there soon. It'll be up there soon. So listeners, watchers, just watch for that coming soon. And here's the part where we all try to
Um,
find the buttons.
well, I will say before hopefully you've hit stop, if people
I
are
haven't
interested
stopped
in
it.
experimental work, to check out Monica Ong's new collection, Planetaria, and you know, be brave and write long things.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And now I hit the stop button.